Shalom, and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat sermon with Rabbi Matt Shapiro.
There is an organization that I adore, and you've probably heard me talk about a lot already in various capacities. It's an organization called M Squared, the Institute for Experiential Jewish Education. And they work with educators and organizations, and they also do work trying to address and name and look at issues in the broader Jewish community. They recently put out what they called the Hope Study, which they sent out to Jewish professionals, asking people, as we continue to move and come out of and move through a fraught and challenging stretch as Jews, where and how they're finding hope and where they're finding hope to be challenging. They said the Hope Study is the largest effort of its kind to understand how Jewish professionals are sustaining or losing hope. They got responses from almost 1,000 people. So before I give you the responses, I'll ask you, what do you think the biggest concern was? What do you think the biggest concern was? Anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism, 3 for anti-Semitism, anti-Israel, public opinion towards Israel, exactly. That's what I would have thought as well. But, this is from the survey, when professionals identify their greatest challenges, the biggest threats aren't coming from outside the Jewish community, they are emerging from within it. That by far the most common response was internal community division, with 100 mentions, nearly twice as many as any other. In their own words, professionals describe feeling caught between competing factions, unable to navigate constituency expectations, and, quote, watching our community tear itself apart. Second was concerns about leadership crises, and anti-Semitism, which each one of you named that I heard, or concerns related to Israel, but anti-Semitism ranked third at 11% despite the rise in anti-Semitic incidents. I am not dismissing concerns around anti-Semitism or anti-Israel sentiment as essential to address. We are blessed here to have a wonderful security team, without which we would certainly be challenged as a community, and I'd imagine many of you might have that concern in mind coming off the really scary moment at Wilshire Boulevard Temple earlier this week, which fortunately was contained relatively quickly, but certainly was a fraught and difficult moment. And it's certainly noteworthy that the hearts and minds of my fellow professionals, what's the top concern? Holding our communities together. I don't know if I could respond to you if you asked me what my top worry was. I have a lot of top worries. But I would say that one of our community's main assets here at Temple Beth is that we are a big tent. That we have a lot of different people who think a lot of different things about a lot of different things. And that holds a lot of possibility. It's certainly something that we can leverage for growth and conversation, and it's not easy, and it takes work, and it's important to pay attention to. The brilliant scholar Michal Biton had an article come out just yesterday talking specifically about the threat of internal divisions. She wrote, "We are far more capable of destroying ourselves than our enemies are. External threats are real, but what breaks us is what we do to one another." And there are shades in this article for those of you who are familiar with the idea that the Second Temple was not destroyed only or primarily because of the threat and then what happened with the Romans, but because of sinat chinam, because of causeless hatred, because of how Jews were responding to other Jews, and that weakened us so much that we weren't able to respond to the external existential threats that we face. Dr. Biton went on to say, anti-Semitism unites us because the threat is external and clear and shared, but a people that cannot define what holds it together, that tolerates fracture, cannot endure. So this is a call to all of us, she says, to consider this. The question that you might be asking is, of course, well, why was that article released yesterday? It's because she sees in this week's parasha a turning point in the Genesis narrative, in this parsha of Vayishlach, when at last there was some reconciliation between Jacob and Esau, that there's a shift from looking at challenges with external enemies to internal ones, that it's a pivot point, that now for the rest of the book, the primary struggle that we see illustrated is not with those outside of us as a people, but rather inside in the ongoing narrative of Joseph and his brothers. And we'll be grappling with that through the weeks ahead. And Dr. Bitton is, of course, right to note this pattern. And I think it's also possible that we can back up a little bit in the Parsha to see this reflected in a different way, to see how this can be reflected in the experience of the individual as well. That we can think about ourselves as people and how we might face difficult moments externally out in the world. And we also face the challenge of figuring out how we can bring the different internal pieces of ourselves together. That's something we face as a people, as Jews. That's also something that each one of us can and needs to grapple with as an individual. You heard earlier this morning the famous scene where Jacob has a night wrestling match. The scene is set that he's returning home to try to reconcile with his twin brother Esau, and he is left alone at night. He is confronted with an unnamed Ish, literally a person with whom he wrestles until dawn. Jacob won't concede. This anonymous person wrenches his hip, but Jacob still won't let go. And he insists, as this Ish, this person, is begging to leave before dawn, Jacob asks for a blessing. And he is given the name of Israel, because he has grappled with beings both divine and human. I could talk about this scene for the next 45 minutes. I won't. We're all excited about Kiddush. But one of the main questions that we can explore here is, who is this unnamed Ish? When there's an ambiguity in the Torah that calls to us to try to figure out what's happening. Some people say it's an angel. Some people say it's God. Some people say it's Esav. And I think it's also possible to consider that this moment is an illustration, actually, of Jacob wrestling with himself. That he has come to a point in his life where he can no longer run from all the different pieces of who he is. And before he can move forward to try to get to a place of reconciliation with his brother, first he has to find some way of finding reconciliation within himself. And we can see that as embodied in these two names. There's the Jacob, there's the person who he has been, and there's the Yisrael, there's the part of him that is able to grapple with God, that is able to really dive into those conflicts. Because we have seen that there are ways in which Jacob has been avoidant. So there's the Jacob who has run from conflict, and there's the Jacob who's willing and able to navigate conflict. There's the part of Jacob that has been a trickster, that has deceived. And there is also the part of him that can and wants to live with integrity. There's the part of him, as there is in so many of us, the part that wants to stay stuck or is having a hard time getting unstuck from old patterns. And there's the part that wants to change. There's the part that wants to grow. And each one of us has some version of this. And so then the question is, how do we each wrestle? How can we each integrate those different pieces, or at least try to? Rabbi Levi Meir, who was the longtime head of spiritual care at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center and a psychologist, has a whole article about this scene that's remarkable. I had like 6 quotes from the article here originally, but I'll just give you one. Rabbi Meir said, "People often perceive danger in struggling with life and with God. Yet each individual needs to examine these aspects of life. Each one of us has an obligation to look at those challenging pieces that we might want to shy away from. And again, then only when we have done that can we do the work of trying to move forward." And so I'll invite you to think about what those different parts might be for you. For me, there's the part that can be very focused on myself, and there's the part that can be more altruistic and giving. There's the part of me that can be really impulsive, and believe it or not, there is also the part of me that can be calm. There's the part of me that can be a little too silly, a little too much levity, and there's the part that can be a little too serious, taking myself too seriously. And so then the question is not, how do I just do one or the other, but how do I put those pieces together? How do I integrate them? And whoever you are, whatever those challenges might be, it's not easy. And it's really important. It can leave a mark, as it did with Jacob when he had his hip wrenched. But that wrestling, Rabbi Meir is saying to us, is essential to move forward into the next task that faces us. That Jacob is then able to move forward and reconcile with his brother. And not only that, but in the middle of the next chapter, we are actually told specifically that he is shalem, that he is whole, that this is a person who has managed to bring all those different pieces together, a model of being an integrated person. I'm not going to chant it. You all know the Shema. And usually when we say the Shema, we think about it as a call to each one of us, a call to all the different people in the space, for all of us to unite because we are the people of Israel. That we say, "Hear, O Israel, hear all of the people, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." Some of you might know a midrash that it's Jacob's sons responding to him at his deathbed. But in another essay in Rabbi Meir's book, he gives a different reading that I want to share with you that speaks to this idea really beautifully. It's actually, we can see it as Jacob talking to himself. That Jacob, in a moment of reflection, is calling to a different part of himself. He's saying, "Hear, O Israel." Jacob, the part of him that's Jacob, is calling to the part of him that is Israel. And he's saying, we are the same. We're trying to serve the same purpose. So the Lord, our God, other part of me, the Lord is one. We're trying to figure this out together. We're trying to figure out how to be one integrated whole so that as we move through the world, especially when we're facing challenges, we're able to do so in an integrated and intact way. And so what I'm suggesting is that we tell this story about Jacob and or Israel so that when we ourselves might struggle and grapple with those different parts of ourselves, we can be less lonely. And so that we can find some hope in that story, as fraught and painful as it is. That those moments of darkness and challenge that we might face as individuals, that we may still in some ways be in as a people, invite, maybe even demand that wrestling so that we can find ways to move forward. This moment is an opportunity to grapple who we as a people really are. But that wrestling, we're more capable of doing it externally when we've done it internally. That it's much harder to navigate the possibilities and fear of external divisions out amongst our people and out in the world when we're divided within ourselves. And on the other hand, when we see that we can grapple with the most challenging parts of ourselves, it can in turn build faith and trust and hope that we can navigate that with other people in the world that we can find that difficult to navigate. And that's not a given, but it's possible. This well-known and beautiful and painful and difficult and evocative scene provides a framework for thinking about how we can bring the different parts of ourselves together. And that framework, in turn, provides an opportunity for considering how we can hold our communities together. And that when we do this work, maybe, just maybe, it can help us all find a little more hope.
You've been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast website or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information on Temple Beth Am, Los Angeles, please visit www.tbala.org.